Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, today I'm covering another video from Hoser because it's been a few months. And this one was recommended to me, and I thought it'd be interesting to hopefully be able to learn and add some context to, which is titled, Why This Unrecognized African Country Loves Trump. All right, this original video is going to be linked down below. Please check that out. Hit the like button if you liked what we saw here, and sub if you're not. All right, let's check it out. All right, where are we talking about?
Zoom into Kosovo's capital, Pristina, and sitting just one street away from its city center, you can find an 11-foot tall golden statue of Bill Clinton.
Makes sense.
This is found on the Bill Clinton Boulevard with a massive photo of Bill Clinton plastered on the ex-communist building behind him. This is because Bill was the president to authorize the NATO bombing of Serbia in 1999, ending the Kosovo conflict and effectively giving independence to this ethnic Albanian breakaway state.
Yeah, a lot of history behind that, of course. Serbian nationalists really look at Kosovo as a place that should be not populated by Albanians, or at least be controlled by Serbians, because there's an ancient history going back to Serbia as some ancestral land of, Serbians today. So hearkening back to, very deep history.
Although many Americans don't think of Kosovo, I think most are pretty amused to learn of a faraway land celebrating one of their presidents.
Oh, by the way, Serbia does not observe the independent state of Kosovo.
Especially for a president they don't even think all that much about. If things play out right, though, Bill Clinton may not be the only president to get this treatment.
Yeah. Yep. Doing the dance. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but it's so funny. Look at that video. All right, all of y'all, if you're single and you're going to get married at your wedding, I want you to do the Trump dance. And you have to play YMCA because he loves YMCA, and you got to do that. Can we get a funny name for that? Let me know down below. There we go. I've seen so many.
This is Hargeisa, the capital of a territory in northern Somalia known as Somaliland.
Somaliland, yeah.
Somaliland already acts like an independent country. It has its own elected government, legal system, military, currency, passport, flag, but not recognition.
There's colonial dealings with that too, going back especially to the Italians, those Italian Somaliland, before the empires were broken up and decolonization. Never got Ethiopia though. At least, not until the Mussolini years, but scramble for Africa. Now they failed.
Except from Taiwan. Shout out Taiwan. Passport, flag, but not recognition. Except from Taiwan. Shout out Taiwan. What could famed...
Makes sense from Taiwan's perspective. They're going to support places that maybe aren't seen by everybody as legitimate by their partners. Say with them in China, does not see Taiwan's legitimacy.
Isolationist Donald Trump possibly have to do with Somaliland. There's a clue hidden in a recently influential document of America's conservative space, the Heritage Foundation's Projects 2025. In Chapter 6, Kieran Skinner writes that one of the main goals of the State Department's interests in Africa is to counteract Chinese influence on the continent.
Yep.
This includes the recognition of Somaliland's statehood as a hedge against the U.S.'s deteriorating position in Djibouti.
All right, Somalia, the whole region, Africa just in general. Again, one of those places is part of the decolonization movement that, as it was becoming independent, was caught up in the Cold War, essentially. United States, Soviet Union, both coming in, trying to establish relations there, try to establish deals to spread their influence, again, during the Cold War. Now, exit Soviet Union, because they don't exist anymore, and Russia doesn't have nearly the possibility for the hegemony, the current Russia, as, say, China does. And that's actually what you're seeing right now is China inserting, I think, in a lot of those places that especially were maybe battlegrounds, proxy wars and stuff like that, back to the old Cold War, because there was a vacuum for international influence, especially when it comes to investment into these countries. And often what these countries or places that want to be country are looking for is who can support them with the least amount of strings attached. And that is indeed something that you get to see China get involved in, and with fewer strings attached than you might have had against the United States or, even today, or the old Soviet Union, of course. But Somalia was one of those battlegrounds.
There it is, written out right there. Not much of a riddle.
Djibouti. We all laughed at that when we learned about that.
Somaliland's recognition is the U.S.'s deteriorating position in Djibouti. Djibouti is not a particularly large country.
We all laughed at Djibouti when we first heard it.
Or even a strong U.S. ally. Yeah. What the U.S. sees in it, though, is what sits to the north of the country, the Bab el-Mandeb. This is a 30-kilometer wide strait which separates the Red Sea and Suez Canal shipping lanes from the Indian Ocean.
By the way, that's why, especially in the Scramble for Africa era, so before the Cold War, this area was so prone to invasions and things, is its proximity to the Suez Canal, which again literally connects Europe to Asia. And in an era of the late 1800s and into the 1900s, when imperialism was at its height, Europeans wanted as much access to these areas as possible because it's the most important trade route on the entire planet.
When shipping between Europe and Asia, a shipping company can either decide to pay the roughly $500,000 fee to transit through the Suez, or take the long way and sail around Africa.
Like they did for centuries.
This route increases the journey by about 4,000 miles, 9 days, and up to $1 million in extra fuel costs.
Yep.
I know which one sounds like a better deal to me. It's for
Remember, the Suez Canal was also it was financed by foreign financiers, British and the French especially. That's also why when Egypt was getting its independence, it was a major goal for Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president, to nationalize that. And there was a skirmish there and almost could have broke out to a much bigger war. But now they control that because it's such an important part of their economy now that Egyptians want to control. So if you can't control the strait itself, then territories near it are also going to be very important.
Reason that around 17,000 ships carrying around $1 trillion worth of goods cross through the Suez and Red Sea every year. That's 12% of all global trade, or around 30% of all ocean-going containers.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And anyone who has a stake
you guys remember that ship that got stuck? Did you ever hear about how much? Because it was stuck there a few years ago. Was it for about a week or so? It was like $1 billion, at least, like billions of dollars that got that was lost essentially from that.
Global Affairs sees their interest in keeping this trade going, particularly concerned with SEI implications if it stopped: security, energy, and inflation. Part of this is making sure the region remains relatively stable. Militant groups in the Horn of Africa and the Middle East can and have been able to slow down trade, take over vessels as hostages, and scare shipping companies from sailing through the strait.
It's true. I mean, again, if you can halt that trade or hijack it or something, you are controlling global economics. It's crazy how important that actually is.
First, it was a group of Somali pirates who've attacked nearly 500 ships during their decades of activity, mostly to extort hostage money. Then the strait was taken over again by members of the Houthi group, a terrorist organization based in western Yemen and backed by the Iranian government.
Because they have beef with Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Saudi Arabia do not get along.
In response to the Gaza war, the Houthis had sailed and flown out to sea, attacking over 60 commercial vessels over the period of a year. Many shippers, including Maersk, decided they couldn't take the risk and chose to sail around Africa instead.
That's crazy.
Here's a map before the Houthi attacks and one after them. Shipping prices between Europe and Asia tripled in January after both insurance costs spiked and shipping times increased by 30%. And this was at a time when the world finally thought they were getting over inflation.
Yeah, the COVID era inflation, so bumped again.
A joint mission by the United States and the United Kingdom to airstrike key Houthi bases followed, with over 450 missile strikes reported across the Houthi-controlled territory in northwest Yemen.
Yeah, the U.S. has ships all over this region because you can see the economic interest.
And where exactly do they send those missiles from? You guessed it. Djibouti. Before Ismail Omar Guelleh became president in 1999, only the French had operated a military base in the country, a remnant as their days of colonial
French
overlord.
Love Djibouti.
But since then, Guelleh has signed deals with various world leaders and expanded that privilege to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other nations. This includes the USS...
Again, who's going to give you a good deal, right? Who's going to give you a good deal in these international politics? Those countries that showed up there around the planet.
Camp Lemonnier base set up in 2002 at the beginning of the War on Terror to be more capable of fighting Somalia.
Dude, short sleeve suits. Okay, this needs to be a thing. Sorry to get off topic here. We need this. Why do we have to be oppressed by long sleeves with suits? Okay, maybe I want to wear a suit where it's warm. I don't have to be in Somalia for that to happen.
And Yemeni terrorists. Here in the Djibouti city base, there are 4,000 personnel. The French Chabeli airport used to launch American missile and drone strikes, and a whopping $60 million rent fee to Djibouti's government. When Trump tweets about bombing ISIS planners in caves, this is where the bombs fly out from. And for many years, the US saw itself and its allies as the only bosses in town. It'll
be interesting to see, though, if Trump pulls out of a lot of these agreements, which it seems to be a big thing for him. Will that proximity to these territories, is it just going to stop? Are we going to see just an insane amount of isolationism here that has been happening? Now, history shows us for the United States that's not going to happen. There's too much value in having stability around the world for the United States to thrive economically. But that doesn't mean, they can't just start launching everything from ships and stuff like that.
Joint operations with European nations and successfully pressuring Djibouti to block Russia from starting a base here. Russia has since shifted to courting Sudan in hopes of getting a Red Sea base. But America did not succeed in pressuring Djibouti out of a Chinese deal.
Yeah.
Now, sitting across the city is the Chinese military base, just 12 kilometers away from Camp Lemonnier.
Everyone uses this.
To sweeten their presence, China pays $100 million a year in rent, and they financed and constructed some critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
The Djibouti...
China, similar thing around Panama as well, doing infrastructure, building ports. Because as you can see here, they give these countries fantastic deals that is going to make these countries, take the best deal. And that may not be the United States. And it seems to be the case more and more that maybe that is going to increase, right?
Data center, the Darela port, and a railway that links the port to Ethiopia. Awkward. It's important to note that this Chinese base was built during Trump's first term in 2017, and it very much raised concern among his staff.
Yep,
Most notable was from his national security advisor, John Bolton, who worried about China's bribes, opaque agreements, and the strategic use of debt in their African development strategy. Djibouti's debt to China totals around 70% of its GDP. Although it's not necessarily true that China purposefully uses loans as a way to debt trap smaller countries, red flags were raised in Sri Lanka when the Hambantota port was leased to China for 99 years as part of a deal to pay some of their debt to Chinese state-owned companies.
One thing that countries are going to, are loving and are going to continue to love with doing with China is these long-term deals like this. One of the reasons that China can do that is they're a single-party state. They don't have to worry necessarily about another regime coming in China, a new political group or something like that, a new political party, come in and undo that. They can make these long-term deals with the confidence that those that are in charge in decades going further amongst the descendants, I guess you would say, of like the current group. Whereas like in the United States, short-term deals are going to be a bigger deal. And if you're one of those countries that is, getting one of these deals, if from the United States, you might be a little wary of that because you don't know if that deal is going to be broken. In fact, you could probably almost bet that it will be if the politics change.
Get it? Red flags were raised? To be fair, that was more Sri Lanka wanting desperately to get rid of a failed port than some masterful scheme by the Chinese. Though, if Djibouti had its own debt crisis and something similar were to happen to the Darela port, which China currently owns a quarter of through its state-owned company China Merchants Group, that could have serious implications on America's security. Well, their foreign operations at least. They're only...
Not security for like the United States itself, although it can have... economic insecurity can come from that, especially if you're not going to be doing free trade and things like that, and you're going to be very unreliant on others.
Permanent military base on the African continent could logistically be controlled by China. It's this risk which is at the heart of America's growing skepticism with Djibouti. What China is actually doing here is obvious. They're conducting anti-piracy and freedom of navigation missions in the Red Sea like everyone else. After all, right. China is probably the single biggest loser if Red Sea trade is shut down. But their African strategy is bigger than just this tiny country. Right. Across the continent, they've been investing tens of billions into various infrastructure projects.
This is something I'm really glad that he's saying, that I think a lot of people are going to want to take into account, which is here in the United States, is if the United States pulls out from the economic support or whatever that they have around the world and deals that they made, whether they're military or economic or something, that those do leave a void, right? And China is and already has been filling those voids. So the conversation in American politics is really going to need to be, is the United States going to be okay with that? I'm not saying one or the other. I'm saying like it's a conversation that's going to have to happen. If it's seemingly not good that China becomes and has this economic reach around the country, if you feel it's a threat to the United States, then you're going to see more U.S. intervention and try to increase its influence, kind of like the U.S. especially has done in the past, but maybe with the rhetoric going on right now, may be wanting to do less of. But if you don't see it as a problem, right, and think that it's more important to have U.S. economic independence and saying we don't need those places, or, you know, you have to then address is like, is it okay if another country does that? And we'll see if that conversation comes up, because it is integral and completely connected to policy that is going to be going on right now and is being talked about right now.
Announcing investing tens of billions into various infrastructure projects, announcing them in large multi-year packages.
Harbors.
This includes 100 ports, much-needed railway lines,
right,
highways, dams, and parliament buildings, and major construction aid.
Now, even before some of the rhetoric right now about trying not to do this around the world, even before that, a lot of these contracts were going to China. They were not going to the United States. Even again, when American policy was like, yeah, we are interested in this kind of thing. And it does go back to this, I think, idea that China may be giving better deals to these countries, long-term deals, fewer strings attached or something like that. That may happen. Now, will we see, because a lot of these deals are still kind of new, what will China do if these countries, say, default on their loans or something like that? Will we see a foreign, for China, like a military intervention or something as a way to, I don't want to say bullying, but like, you know, really pressure these states to make do on their end for paying back loans or whatever strings are going to be attached. We probably don't have enough historical data, or it hasn't gone on long enough for us to know yet what China would do in those situations. But nevertheless, contracts are going to the Chinese, especially infrastructure.
While the American government has traditionally used aid packages for smoothing African relations, China builds things and gives out loans. Which strategy is more effective?
Which may be slashed, but I know the Supreme Court
test to
is
see
blocking
how China's soft power
pull
has
out of
grown
USAID
through
program.
time is to look at which countries maintain relationships with Taiwan. In 1970, the continent was rather split in recognition between the Republic and the People's Republic. But fast forward to today, and after
Taiwan
all that
China.
spending, building, and currying favor, only tiny Eswatini still recognizes Taiwan as the China. Only 4 other countries maintain...
Yeah, nobody does the China. Yeah, nobody does that. That's amazing. I got to see what Eswatini's relationship to them is. That's wild. I had no idea. That's so interesting.
Informal relations with Taiwan, and this is a list that includes Somaliland.
You don't even have to say that, though, to get Taiwan support.
Has taken the People's Republic pill.
While what they're saying is that Taiwan, that leadership, it could go on forever. Look into the Chinese Civil War. Essentially, the communists defeated the nationalists, who was the governing body before that, driven out to the island of Taiwan, and still claimed that they were the legitimate government, even though on the island of Taiwan, okay, under Chinese, the Chinese sphere of what they control, but saying that they are still the legitimate rulers over mainland China. And not a lot of people necessarily say that. People have come around, especially, I don't know, like the Americans, at least like the 70s, because United States declined to really attribute the Maoist regime as legitimate at that time, because they supported the Chiang Kai-shek nationalists earlier before that. But anyways, yeah, so now it's not necessarily like even accepting that, okay, Taiwan is like independent of China, but that's why not a lot of people will say, well, Taiwan is actually legitimate, still legitimate rulers of mainland China, which, yeah, nobody says.
African trade with the US has decreased by 33% in the last decade. Trade with China has increased by 60%. 3/5 of what China imports are mineral resources with strategic relevance. That is, those minerals China does not have in its own territory, particularly those which make batteries. Yeah. Cobalt, nickel, lithium, and the sort. China is still incredibly reliant on outside sources of oil and natural gas. Sure. They import about 70% of their oil and 40% of their natural gas. For China to be energy secure, it means either burning coal, which they do a lot, or finding a way to mass produce batteries. To China...
Yeah, are we going to see China really decrease that coal output? We know it's environmentally, it's disastrous how much China will put out, but they are moving rapidly towards cleaner energy sources. They're kind of the leaders now in solar and that sort of thing, but anyway, yeah, will they move to that and start decreasing that environmental pollution? Hopefully, we all win there.
Having access to these resources is a matter of national security. You know, access to these resources is a matter of national security. You know, becoming more reliant on certain smaller countries to cut out the influence larger countries have on it.
Sure.
So America is rapidly losing its influence not just in Africa, but in the country which hosts their most important military base on the continent. Instead of trying to swing once US-leading countries back into their orbit, is it a better strategy to just make a new country? One that'll be pro-US from the get-go?
Probably not.
Of course, Somaliland is not new.
I don't know. I don't think so.
They've been de facto independent since 1991, with a stable government holding democratic elections since. Contrast this to Somalia, which has more or less been in a state of crisis for the past 3 decades, with various militant groups fighting for control over its territory.
And again, this goes back to Cold War proxies. You had those with socialist sympathies and the one with more American-aligned philosophies going at each other, which created an incredibly unstable region.
There's an offshoot of the Islamic State in the north and territories controlled by Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Shabaab throughout the south of the country. In fact, through land sales, zakats, and import levies, Al-Shabaab makes around half of what the federal government makes, around $100 million a year. It is borderline a state rivaling the power of the recognized government, which only controls a coalition of cities in the southern half of the country and most of the northern half, besides Somaliland. America has tried for decades to stabilize Somalia while keeping the federal government in charge of the entire territory. They've won some battles, airstriking Islamic State and Al-Shabaab bases from Camp Lemonnier. And
this goes back to Black Hawk Down, Mogadishu stuff. It goes way back for the United States.
Training the Danab Brigade, the federal government's elite command to fight the rebels. But there have also been many failures. None more famous than the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, where 3 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down and United Nations forces had to withdraw from the city. And none more embarrassing than the state of war Somalia still finds itself in over a decade after the government was established in 2012. Since America is losing influence over Djibouti and still sees its interests in having a stable Horn of Africa, its One Somalia policy has been called into question by many conservative figures. Recognizing Somaliland as an independent country could help to diversify America's footing in the region. The Somalilander Foreign Affairs Minister has explicitly said, I quote, "If the US wants a military base here, we will give it to them." Most likely, this would be a base in Berbera, Somaliland's largest seaside city, which already holds a half-built Emirati military base and a substantial port owned mostly by the UAE.
That's a prime position, especially if the work has already been done, because these aren't natural harbors here. There has to be a lot of building up of the territory to allow for these harbors. But this will be an interesting question because, does it seem like in the second Trump term, a lot more emphasis on getting out of other countries, but if it's deemed as beneficial for the United States, just from a straight up, just like economic level, what will happen over the next 4 years or so? What do you guys think about this right now? Just with what's going on, would the U.S. take them up on this? Would Trump be interested?
An American ally. The U.S. could have 2 Red Sea bases for the price of 2 Somalias. But simply creating a new country and not expecting others to react is, well, it's kind of American.
Yeah.
First of all, there are those living in Somalia that don't want to be Somalilander, with a sizable chunk of the rebels wishing to live in a united Somalia, most notably some members in the Darood clan and Islamic State groups. Then you have to think about the relations that would be severed between the 2 Somalias.
Place with foreign influence either.
Well, not like they're any good to begin with. The federal government sees Somaliland as an integral part of its territory and perceives any sort of independence talk as an explicit act of aggression against the Somali state.
This almost would definitely require like American intervention to be able to support something like this, which would probably cause a civil war, right? Could this be done peacefully?
Somaliland has tried to circumvent this aggression by teaming up with a mutual enemy of Somalia, Ethiopia. In 1977,
because of each country was supported by either Soviet Union or the United States. That's where a lot of that actually started too.
Under Somali President Siad Barre, Somali forces invaded Ethiopia to attempt to conquer the ethnic Somali Ogaden region. No borders changed, but tens of thousands died.
These were arbitrary borders put in by foreigners, not based off of local ethnicities
between the 2 countries throughout the following decades. So on January 1st, 2024, Somaliland and Ethiopia signed a Memorandum of Understanding, an informal alliance and a deal that would give the Ethiopian Navy access to 20 kilometers of Somaliland's coastline, as well as a 19% stake in the port of Berbera in exchange for a stake in Ethiopian Airlines, the largest on the continent, and, most importantly, an assessment of Somaliland recognition. Ethiopia is the world's most populous landlocked country.
So Ethiopia would stay out of this if that was to happen, essentially. That's what I'm getting from this. If Somaliland wanted to break off from Somalia as a whole, Ethiopia, their neighbor, would be like, it's fine.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has called ocean access the existential question of Ethiopian development.
Sure, they don't have it.
Currently, Ethiopia imports about 90% of its goods through ports in Djibouti, making it reliant on another country to simply trade with the outside world.
Right.
Somaliland, yes, if recognized, would also have control over their trade, but with equity in the Berbera port and direct control over the coastline, would let Ethiopia have much more autonomy over its imports and exports.
So that was the thing originally I was wondering was, what would Ethiopia get out of that? And obviously having access to Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean would be fantastic for them.
So, why hadn't Ethiopia by January 1st, 2025, 1 year after the memorandum was signed, recognized Somaliland yet? Simply put, they backed out. There are the external pressures, like destroying its relationships with the Arab states, Turkey, possibly the US if done poorly, and Somalia, whose president during the tensions called it an enemy on par with al-Shabaab.
That's to be understood. That's to be understood that was going to be an enemy. But yeah, the Arab world does not like that, sees it as another forward operating base by the United States, which they already don't like in so many parts of the world. But, what influence would they have? The United States, will they care if it upsets the Arab world? It depends, I guess, on who we're talking about.
Egypt. Egypt
Okay, what?
is on par with Al-Shabaab. Then there's Egypt.
Right.
Egypt and Ethiopia have grown into bitter rivals in the past 15 years over the construction of Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam. This dam will span the length
Egypt
of
already
the
has
Blue
so
Nile
many
River,
dams.
providing electricity to tens of millions of Ethiopian houses and businesses.
Not a lot of power source
but for
options.
downstream Egypt, where the Nile River is its lifeblood, any reduction in the flow of water represents a threat to its livelihood.
Sure.
It also gives Ethiopia some insane leverage
They do
over
with Sudan,
Egypt
though.
and Sudan in any sort of future negotiation. Tensions rose higher in August 2024 when Egypt signed a security deal with Somalia, sending the government military equipment and aid. But then in December, Somalia and Ethiopia finally held talks, mediated by Turkey, a strong supporter of
Erdogan.
Somalia. Diplomatic relations were restored between the two, and Ethiopia was even promised reliable access to the sea.
Man, it can get so hard and confusing if you don't follow this stuff just so close about who's friends with who and who hates who, right? And then adding the context to that, the historical context is like another level of very important understanding. But yeah, I think your head can spin. It can be really hard, understandably, to be able to trace all these connections, you know?
Under Somalia's sovereignty, even promised reliable access to the sea under Somalia's sovereignty,
So
likely killing the Somaliland deal. Ethiopia.
So in that way, wouldn't Ethiopia win either way? Because both sides are basically wanting Ethiopian support, but like you'll each get access. Seems like it'd be a lot better to get the access though from Somaliland, just geographically speaking, than the rest of Somalia.
Probably could have held its ground a little longer if it wasn't for its internal issues. The Tigray civil war and wars in Amhara and Oromia have plagued the country with violence, killing thousands and displacing millions. 10 million people were then affected by one of the worst droughts in its history, and the country then struggled to pay back its debt, defaulting twice in 2 years. The dark humor is, after spending all this time trying to get ocean access, Ethiopia can't even afford to build a navy now. What was once seen as an inevitable African success story
You'd have to outsource
lost
it.
much of its momentum in just 3 years.
It's like you'd have to outsource your naval protection from some other country. But who would that be? United States, Turkey, apparently, China.
This obviously complicates things for Somaliland. But realistically, what's even better than Ethiopian recognition is American recognition. Luckily for them, the Republican
Mr.
Party
Beats
swept.
we all know Mr. Beats thumbnail style. There it is. It's pretty recent. Mr. Beats just put out that video.
American recognition. Luckily for them, the Republican Party swept the 2024 US elections.
We had a powerful win in all.
This is where I'm wondering, though, is with the current rhetoric, is it more beneficial to have for like those countries if they're going to make a deal with the United States or create a base and all that stuff? Is it actually better to go with Trump, though? Because I don't know, because the rhetoric that's been going on, rather than if Harris was in there or Biden was still. I don't know about that, though.
7 swing states, and the popular vote, we won by millions.
In term 2 Trump?
Of people.
Maybe term 1 Trump, but at least term 2 Trump, maybe it's a little bit more unpredictable. Am I wrong on that?
In the past few years, Republican Congressman Scott Perry has introduced a bill a couple times to recognize Somaliland.
Okay.
Here's the entire thing in full. Senators Jim Risch, Mike Rounds, and Chris Van Hollen have introduced the Somaliland Partnership Act to establish a partnership between the two countries. And a U.S. delegation
antithetical
has
to what
even
the movement
visited
right now is, though,
Somaliland
to
following the November elections
not get
both
involved in this
countries.
stuff?
Op-eds from the Heritage Foundation promote
Heritage Foundation is supportive of it. Okay, why the U.S. should recognize Somaliland. Again, I think there's going to be a big debate around this. I don't think this is going to be bipartisan or even within the Republican Party. Interesting.
Somalilander independence, featuring interviews from their president. And prominent African foreign affairs experts like Joshua Messervy and J. Peter Pham, who served in the first Trump administration, have called the One Somalia policy a disaster, and both advocate for Somaliland recognition.
Okay.
After all, the federal government has not established control over its own territory since its founding, a founding linked to Hillary Clinton no less. And Somalia ranks as the second most corrupt country on earth by Transparency International, whereas Somaliland is a more or less stable, democratic country. But really, this story and the independence of Somaliland all depends on the thoughts of one man. One of Trump's last moves in the global politics of his first term was to withdraw all 700 American soldiers stationed in Somalia at the time.
This is what I'm saying. I think this whole time now, and okay, if they loved him before, are they going to love him now? Because again, this second term seems to be really what we're seeing here with these early executive orders of trying to get troops out of these different parts of the world. But then you have the Heritage Foundation, which supports the Republican Party, but you could also see the bipartisan efforts, at least somewhat, between Democrats and certain types of Republicans, is most assuredly will not be agreed upon by all people that are supporters and voters of Donald Trump. So yeah, this is where I think it's going to be interesting what happens here.
Something reversed by the Biden administration. The global politics of his second term are even harder to predict. Within the first month of his second presidency, he both dismantled the U.S. Agency of International Development, a clear sign he wants to disengage with the wider world, and announced.
This was just, I think, announced, was it today, I think, when I did this, cover this, that Supreme Court voted 5-4 to basically block the cuts it looks like U.S. aid is going to have. So that cut may not actually happen, or at least will have to be readdressed.
Announced an American takeover sign he wants to disengage with the wider world, and announced an American takeover of the Gaza Strip, a step for America to get more involved in Middle Eastern politics than ever before. Which is also,
some of his supporters are saying they don't like that either. We're going to go stick around in there. Oh gosh, look at Yahoo Trump AI'd there. But yeah, like, okay, I thought we were getting out of this stuff, right? It's causing a little bit of a discourse. Interesting.
He's a man who hates norms, but if there's one thing we know Trump loves, it's deals. You could even say
he loves
his
those orders.
art form.
He loves those executive orders.
Won't be recognized by the U.S. without giving Trump something.
Right.
He would certainly get a military base. Some think he may want to use Somaliland as a place to deport asylum seekers. There's talk of
like Latin America ones, or ones coming from Africa. Are we going to give Elon a rocket base?
To use Somaliland as a place to deport asylum seekers. There's talk of building a U.S. spaceport here, and he would want a guarantee that Somaliland would push against
China. China ate your lunch, Joe.
After all, this is the core reason why American politicians care about Somaliland in the first place. But recognizing Somaliland wouldn't just counter Chinese influence. It would counter Iranian influence by having a stronger position to fight the Houthis.
For sure.
Somali influence,
for sure. Iran
and
would
be a hedge for negotiating with Egypt, where disagreements are starting to grow. It would also improve relations with Ethiopia, a country alienated by the Biden administration over human rights abuses, as well as Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Israel, which Project 2025 recommends creating a formal military alliance with. It might be pure politics, not the plight of the Somalilander people, that gives them independence. But back in 1999, it wasn't the plight of the Kosovar people that eventually got them their independence. And look at Bill's statue over there.
Final thoughts. All right, I'm really, really glad Hoser he did this video on this topic, because it's titled here like why this unrecognized African country loves Trump, to get you to look at it. But he actually brings in a way more important point, which is about the question about what American influence should be across the world. and at a time where it's being, talked about, and it seemed like very appreciated by a lot of people in the United States to try to not be attached to these other countries that especially are in places where there's a lot of drama going on, right? But then it has to be brought up, and why I like to brought this up is then this is not just a decision on its own that is just about country A and country B or whatever it is, because like he was saying at the end there, which was really good, there's a massive domino effect, and even maybe something like a Somaliland could be a domino there, because it's going to bring in opinions, condemnations, or support or something from a whole bunch of other countries that are very important in the world economy and world affairs, just in general there. So it's like, you have to answer is American independence and American isolationism. Are you making that determination that is a major priority, while of course having to think about what the other implications are, that the growing power of, say, like China or something? Is that something that the United States should be concerned about? You can ask yourself about that, but it has to be a part of the conversation. And I am not sure if it is enough a part of the conversation about what the lasting effects will be. Again, in this current administration, this current term right now, with these decisions that have much bigger effects than people might think. So, are all the different outcomes being discussed? Because they have to be. I think that's really important right now. So, like I said, historical context is everything. And if you ignore it, then you are going to see results and consequences of things that you would not know otherwise. And those could be good, but they're usually bad if you don't know the context. So with that, that's why I do this and why I like to cover this stuff. So anyways, great video. I'm glad we got to see this. Tell me what you think about the whole idea of American isolationism. Is that going to be a good thing, taking into account all the other ramifications that will be a part of it? There's a lot you have to understand and to think through before you really have a well thought out, valid opinion. All right, with that, we'll see y'all next time. Bye.